The next art medium we're going to be discussing is printmaking. The term printmaking describes a variety of media developed to create multiple images. Much of our society is printed: books, newspapers, posters, magazines, and cards. Before 1415, every book and manuscript was hand-lettered and hand-illustrated. It was the Gutenberg press that revolutionized the printing process. It is important to consider the history of printmaking to grasp the long history associated with the medium. The technologies for printing and papermaking came to Europe from China. By the 9th century, the Chinese were printing pictures. By the 11th century, the Chinese had invented movable type. Artists today continue to use the handcrafted method of printmaking processes to take advantage of their uniquely expressive properties as an art medium. Prints are considered original works of art. An artist makes prints in a series. These series are called editions. Artists number their prints. If the edition was of 100 prints, the artist would number her prints or his prints 1 out of 100, 2 out of 100, 3 out of 100, etc. The number 100 refers to the total number of prints pulled. As part of the printmaking process, artists make prints called proofs at various stages to see how the image on the block, plate, or stone is developing. These are often labeled AP for artist proof. There are 4 printmaking techniques we're going to be discussing in this chapter: relief, intaglio, lithography, and screen printing. This image shows a printmaker inking a copper plate. In relief printing, artists can produce woodcuts, wood engravings, or linoleum cuts. In the relief process, the printmaker cuts away all the parts of the surface not meant to carry the ink, leaving the design to be printed in relief at the level of the original surface. The surface is then inked, and the ink is transferred to paper with pressure. Japanese artist Hokusai's color woodcut prints have become known around the world. Hokusai worked in close collaboration with highly skilled craftsmen to make the final prints. For each of his woodcuts, specialists transferred Hokusai's watercolor paintings to as many as 20 blocks and then carved the blocks. This print is one of Hokusai's 36 famous views of Mount Fuji, seen from various locations. Artist Emile Nolde worked with the same printmaking technique as Hokusai. However, notice how Nolde incorporates the grain of the wood to enhance the image's expressive properties. Nolde's approach to printmaking exaggerates the features of the face and gives emotional intensity to the image. In Nolde's woodcut, the wood grain is an important part of the composition. In contrast, in Hokusai's woodblock print, you can barely see the grain at all. Another relief printing process is called linoleum cutting. Artist Elizabeth Catlett uses linoleum blocks instead of wood for her relief prints. Linoleum cutting is a recent development in relief printing. The surface is synthetic and doesn't have any grain. Lino cuts allow for rounder and more numerous gouges. Intaglio is the opposite of relief printing. The areas below the surface hold the ink. The image is cut into the copper or zinc plate by hand, or etched using nitric acid. To make a print, the artist inks the plate, rubs the ink into the grooves or indentations, then places damp paper onto the plate, runs the paper through the press, and then pulls the print from the plate. There are 3 broad categories for intaglio printmaking methods. The first is engraving. In engraving, the lines are cut into a polished copper or zinc plate with a burin or an engraving tool. This process takes strength and control. A clean line is desirous for engravings. We see the precise, smooth lines in the paper currency we use today. Dry point is similar to engraving. Using a thin, pencil-like tip, artists dig lines into a soft copper or zinc plate. The burr catches the ink and leaves a soft, slightly blurred line. Dry point lines are fragile and deteriorate rapidly from the pressure of the press. Finally, etching. The process of making an etching begins with the preparation of a metal plate with a ground. usually asphaltum, that is acid resistant. The printmaker then draws through the ground, removing the asphaltum selectively. Then the print is submerged in a nitric acid bath. Acid bites into the plate, wherever the asphaltum has been removed. This makes a groove or a mark. The longer the plate is in the acid, the deeper the mark. When the etching is inked, the deeper marks print darker than the shallow marks, thus allowing the artist much control over value and line. This is an etching by Kathy Kollwitz, the German expressionist artist we've discussed in previous chapters. Now we'll discuss the process of lithography. Lithography was developed in the early 19th century. Lithography is a surface or planographic printing process based on the mutual antipathy of oil and water. Artists work directly on the stone, hence the name lithography, or on a polished sheet of aluminum. Artists draw an image on the surface of the stone with a material called touche, or a lithocrayon. Then they treat the surface with gum arabic and acid to fix it to the stone. The surface is then dampened with water and is inked. The oil-based ink is repelled by the water in the blank areas, but adheres to the greasy areas of the image. As in other printing processes, a sheet of paper is placed on the surface and run through a press. The image is then transferred to the paper. The CD that accompanies the book Art Forms has an excellent digital video on lithography. The artist Honoré Daumier was one of the first great lithographic artists. In this piece he carefully reconstructed an event that occurred during a period of civil unrest in Paris in the year 1834. The militia claimed that a shot was fired from a building on Transnonain Street. Soldiers responded by entering the apartment and killing all the people, most of whom were innocent. This lithograph was published the next day in a paper, and word about the event was quickly spread to the people. The freedom and directness of lithography was the ideal technique for artist Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. In the space of about 10 years, he created over 300 lithographs. Many of them were used for advertisements, posters for entertainers, to bicycles. His posters of the dancer Jane Anvil quickly accelerated her to stardom. This popular poster began with an awkward photograph and came to life in a dynamic oil sketch. The sketch was then incorporated as the subject matter for the lithograph. Screen printing is a refinement of the ancient and simple technique of stencil printing. Artists as early as 15,000 BC used stenciling in their art. Early in the 20th century, stencil technique was improved by adhering the stencil to a screen made of silk that was stretched across a frame. With a rubber-edged tool called a squeegee, ink is pushed through the fabric in the open areas of the stencil to make an image of the stencil on the material being printed. The latest development in screen printing is the photographic stencil, or photo screen, achieved by putting light-sensitive emulsion onto the screen. American artist Andy Warhol popularized this technique during the pop art movement of the 1960s. The image Little Race Riot is a work derived from a news photograph of a 1964 civil rights demonstration. Warhol expanded the photograph and transferred it to a silkscreen, thus magnifying its flat, impersonal character. Andy Warhol did not begin the pop art movement. Rather, his prolific work and his work ethic popularized it. Pop art emerged as human contact with the natural world was being cut off by a flood of manufactured objects, advertising signs, and urban sprawl. The term pop is short for popular, for art that deals with the images of commercially driven mass culture. Pop artists created cool, mechanical images that hid all evidence of their hands at work. Pop painters commonly used photo silkscreen and airbrush techniques to achieve the surface characteristics of such anonymous, mass-produced imagery as advertising, food labels, and comic books.